Hi, folks. Sorry about the tech issues. Sorry about we were having a problem with the streaming from service. So I'm live just myself on YouTube and hoping that people are going to come back in. We'll see what actually happens here. So there we go, Lucas. Thank you for joining, Lucas. How's it going? Well, our producer had some problems. We couldn't connect with the streaming key, and I had to go directly on YouTube. So we're going a little bit late. That's how it's going at this point in time. Hi, Paul. So if this looks a little different than what you might have expected or what you've seen in the past, know that this is just kind of raw YouTube without any bells and whistles. And good to see you, Esam, back. True Crime, hi. I have some questions already from people, which is great. I will go over those in a bit. But a couple things I'm going to repeat today, just to let you know. This show is normally every other week. It is going to be in 2 weeks on August 24th. And after that, we're going to skip a week. So instead of, it'll be shifting to September 14th due to a conflict that I have. And then we're going to be good for every other week for the rest of the year, barring anything bizarre that comes up. So I know this is being recorded, and this will be up on my YouTube channel. This will be up there for people to watch on replay. So again, I will repeat this later on. It's August 24th is next, then September 14th, and every other week after that. Just had to shift a little bit. All right, so why don't I go to a couple of questions? And there's my producer who's joined us as well. So first question, AJ, True Crime. Since you're here, I did find your question on Facebook. Why don't I start out with your question? So the question was, you'd like to hear me discuss what protocol should be standard for field investigations, also what equipment is truly effective. So let me answer the last part first. It depends on what you mean by effective. There is no effective technology that can detect ghosts, spirits, anything paranormal. There's not. We don't know what to detect, basically, is what it amounts to. So all we can do is look for anomalies in the physical environment and what people are experiencing. The thing to remember is that human beings are the first line of detection. We have an experience or a perception which makes us think the place is haunted. If you don't have that, you got nothing. I mean, just because a place is spooky doesn't mean it's actually haunted. So human beings are the first line of detection. You can bring in environmental sensors like EMF sensors. Those are environmental. They're not paranormal sensors. You can bring in sensors like that, like temperature, thermometers, other types of sensors as well, and see if there's any changes in the environment, preferably when someone is having an experience, or at least in the very spot the person is experiencing something or seeing something like a haunting, like a residual haunting. But you need to compare that against a baseline. You need to do good science in that. So again, no equipment is absolutely necessary. In fact, it's the most necessary things you've got are human beings, preferably at least witnesses, and then something to take notes with, even if it's just a matter of using video or recording with an audio recorder. Those are the most important things. Okay, so the protocol. I teach courses for the Ryan Education Center, as many people who join this podcast know, since I tout that every time. I last taught the basic field investigations class in winter of last year. I'll be teaching it again winter of 2026. I'm teaching an advanced course, which starts in October. People can skip the initial class, at least initially, if they communicate with me, and we have to go through a process to make sure you have base knowledge. Because without that basic knowledge, the advanced stuff doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But on the basic front, my books, ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, my book Ghost Hunting, How to Investigate the Paranormal, those give you the basic protocols that we've determined. But it really boils down to number one, most important is interviewing witnesses or people who have had experiences. So I'm going to just give you a quick rundown of kind of the point by point checklist, you might say. Number one, before one goes on an investigation, you take the report of something that is going on. You contact that person, you ask lots of questions. Those questions can be everything, basically starting with what happened, where did it happen, who did it happen to. You need to find out what you're investigating. That's number one. And whether it makes sense to do an investigation, since logistically, it may not make sense to even say, I can do it. I don't fly cross country. It just makes no sense to do something. It also does not make sense to do an investigation um, if that's number two, is the phenomena still happening? Is the activity still current? Are sightings, experiences still happening? Because if somebody calls you, this happens to me all the time, that, I saw a ghost or something happened a year ago. Can you come out and investigate? And it doesn't matter if it's down the street. I'm happy to talk to them on the phone or even on a Zoom call or meet them for coffee if it's very, very local. But there's no point to do an investigation if nothing's going on now. Think of it as a cold case. You got to have that. Second thing, or that's number two. So number three, always explore normal possible causes before you go out. And of course, I usually tell people don't go alone. And this is not because of, this is a safety issue. It's not because of the paranormal. It's because living people can be problematic and certain locations can be unsafe. So you should have somebody around with there. Figure out what you need to record. In other words, write things down, keep track of things. Yes, gather your environmental equipment if you got it. But know who the witnesses are, who the people who've experienced things. If it's a home, know who else lives there and whether they have experienced something, and try to talk to them before you go to begin with. Try to avoid publicity and debunkers. You do not want someone who is a total disbeliever. So true skeptics are okay. And it's good to see folks coming in. I'm really glad to hear that. And Jody, I'm glad your mom liked the chocolate that I recommended as well. Okay, definitely make sure you can get to the witnesses in person, on site. You want to interview them together, separately, throughout the location, where stuff happened, where it didn't happen. Definitely talk to the non-witness people who might live there or work there as well. Again, you're going to ask lots of questions, do in-depth interviews. This is a lot more work than going and sitting down and getting EVPs, isn't it? You want to look for normal explanations for each and every reported event or experience, because typically in cases where there's actual activity, you have a lot of things that are not related and have normal explanations. It's just that people are upset or something, freaked out by things, and they start connecting the dots on things that shouldn't be connected. There's often a lot of normal explanation stuff. Sometimes there's normal explanations for everything. That's your first step. Understand what's potentially paranormal, what has a normal explanation, and then when you gather that idea of potentially paranormal, what bucket does it fit under? Is it a conscious entity? Is it a residual haunting? Is it a poltergeist case related to, if there's physical activity relating to somebody living in the environment? Those are not all the same. They can seem the same, but they're not all the same. You want to look for relationships between the people and the phenomena. I mean, is somebody more commonly experiencing things than other people, and why that might be? You gather all your information together. If you have a psychic or medium or somebody you can bring with you who might be able to back up the witness testimony, pick up things themselves, that's helpful as well. We have some tools for determining what might be going on, or at least the kind of common factors that we talk about in our field. But definitely observe, look for things, and if you have a team, you can give a preliminary assessment of what might be going on, but always kind of back it up and say, I might change my mind, or we might change our minds after we've just pulled all the data together to figure out what's going on. So those things are all important, and you don't want to try to, you want to inform people as what things might be, or even if it's very overt, but you do not want to scare people. So the one thing I'd say is never use the demon word or the malevolent word. If something seems to be harmful, That can be a number of different things, paranormal or not paranormal. That's one thing. Potentially harmful is very different than saying there's an evil entity in your house. And then you decide how you're going to handle the next steps. You don't just simply inform the people, yes, your house is haunted, and leave them alone. There's an ethical piece that you must always consider. If somebody asked for help. Now, if it's a public place and they just want to see what you get, that's one thing. But if it's a residential case or a family or even a private, like an office setting or a workplace, which is very active still, like a restaurant, if they want help, give them help. If they want information, give them information. If they want help, give them information and help as best you can. And then try to write up a report for yourself and know what actually happened. Those are basics. It's kind of parsing it down quite a bit. Okay, let me go back to the chat here and see. And thank you, Paul. So for those of you that may or may not know Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, it's a great podcast. Jimmy was one of my students. He's now one of our instructors for the Ryan Education Center, teaching things like the introduction to parapsychology. And Jimmy's got a great podcast. There is a link on my website, which is lloydauerbach.com, on the media page to the most recent interview I did with Jimmy about a case I had, which at the surface seemed incredibly crazy, paranormal, and harmful, potentially harmful, certainly upsetting to the family, but nothing was paranormal. On the other hand, nothing was something the family could possibly have normally thought of. So it was a really interesting case. We actually ended up helping the family get out of their lease on this place. And that's in Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, one of the most recent podcasts he did. Again, that's on my media page. You'll find actually a lot of interviews I've done for radio and TV on there as well. Okay, Kathy, good to see you here. Paul, am I familiar with the Beyond the Brain series from Bialfan? Yes, I am familiar with that. I just don't have enough time in the day to watch or listen to everything I want to. I do so much online stuff for a day job, which supports my work in parapsychology, and teaching and everything, and grading and all that stuff. Right now, I'm writing a piece for someone's book. I've got to put something together for a group that I'm working with on a rebuttal to a paper that was published in a journal. And I just have my brain power just kind of winds down, and I got to watch some show like we're watching Wednesday right now. And I'm watching Countdown on Amazon Prime and a few other shows here and there. I just finished rewatching Warehouse 13. I got to have stuff that kind of takes my brain out of everything just for entertainment. We got to have downtime. Let's put it that way. So I'm familiar with that. I catch snippets of this stuff like that, but I wish I had a clone to do some work for me. All right. Let me go back to some questions I did see on the web as well. So Marie had asked, how much credence do you put in the meanings of sacred geometry symbols? I actually don't put, honestly, that is up to belief. One of the things that they say about magic, and I do recommend Dean Radin's book, Real Magic, and I think he has a sequel to that coming out this fall, looking at magic. If magic is an intention, is an effect on the natural world, that's psychokinesis. So we can kind of draw parallels between some things that you might consider magic, not stage magic, but other kinds of magic. Sacred geometry falls into magical traditions. And I think it's really about what the symbols mean to people and how much power you give them. That's the only thing I can say for sacred geometry. The other question is, what do you think of comedian Matt Rife's purchase of Ed and Lorraine Warren's estate? I only heard about that this week. I don't know him at all. I didn't even know of him. But I hope he applies comedy to their estate. That's all I can say. I don't think much about the work of Ed and Lorraine Warren for a lot of reasons. And I know that's controversial in the ghost hunting world, but there's a lot of reasons for that. And Jody, thank you. Yes, Warehouse 13 was really a lot of fun. I'm going to start watching Eureka again, since that was a connected show. So that's my next thing to take a look at. All right, another question. Marlene, excuse me. Have there been studies outlining a pattern of characteristics that seem to be predominant in folks who are psychic? Yes and no. So I should say yes, but that's a really good question, actually. Parapsychologists have been looking at common characteristics connect in people connected to psychic experience and abilities since the 19 oops, excuse me, my little cover closed, since the late 1940s. We haven't just been trying to see if ESP exists. We're trying to, or psychokinesis exists. It's what kind of person and what are the psychology, the personality variables and other variables. In fact, I'm teaching a course right now for the Ryan Education Center. We're about to hit week 2 on Tuesday, so you still can join that course. And week 2 about personality and also environmental factors that influence being psychic. So a couple of things. In the studies, one of the things that had been noticed and still is true, but it's also true for human performance in general, not just for psychic performance. And that is belief is one of the most correlated connection characteristics. Believing that psychic ability is possible, believing you can do it, is opening up potential for being psychic. If you don't believe something is possible, you can't do it. Your unconscious may still give you a few experiences, but generally it stops us. Just think about athletics and how human beings have had physical limitations on ourselves. And the example I always love to cite is Roger Bannister in 1954 ran the 4-minute mile, though it was considered impossible for human physiology to run that fast. Once he did it, a whole bunch of people did it, broke the barrier as well. So we set a mental barrier on our physical performance. We set mental barriers on our mental performance, on our emotional performance, on our psychic performance. So that belief is a really major piece. There are other characteristics. Someone who is more creative typically will pay attention to kind of the creative flow, which could include psychic stuff, and not second guess or try to apply logic to explain it away. So creativity is connected. Extroversion versus introversion is connected as well, but no one is only an extrovert and no one is only an introvert. We go through periods and situations where we're both. There are other characteristics that are included there as well. A lot of psychics are very extroverted typically, but they have introverted downtime as well. So just kind of give you a couple things here. I did a study years ago, kind of look back on the psychics that I've worked with in investigations and just generally worked with since I started working in parapsychology in the early 80s. And I wrote a paper, it was a paper that was presented to the Parapsychology Foundation Conference on Spirit Mediumship back in 2005. The presentation itself is on the Parapsychology Foundation's website, YouTube channel. And there's a link. If you go to that media page on LloydAuerbach.com, there is a link to that presentation covering what I talked about for the paper. I haven't ever put up. I've been waiting for the Parapsychology Foundation to do something with the papers from that. They're not now because it's pretty much, unfortunately, on hold, the whole organization. So I will be putting it up on academia.edu, which makes it free to everybody. But here's some points, just basically, that I noticed about the best psychics and mediums. All right, number one, the best are confident without being egotistical, but they still have a healthy ego. We all know, we've seen psychics on TV who usually it's the fictional stuff that they want everybody's attention on them all the time. I have tested out psychics in investigations, or people have presented themselves to me. They want to see how they do in an investigation. They want to offer their services to me, take them on an investigation. And as soon as the attention of everybody goes away from that psychic, they're doing, I'm getting something. Divas need not apply. All right. That's number one. Number two, the best psychics and mediums display good people skills. Mediums, in many respects, have better people skills than a lot of psychic practitioners who are not mediums. And I personally think that's because they're talking to people living and dead. They have a lot of practice with that. The best psychics do not set expectations too high. They know their own limits. They might want to test their limits, and that's perfect. I worked with a Japanese medium back in the 90s. We did a bunch of TV specials for Japanese TV, and I took her into laboratories. We did lots of experiments, things she had never tried before. Some things she did great at, other things she didn't. Her ego was such, that healthy ego. She said, well, never tried it. Now I know I can't do it. That was her response, which is fine. You never want to work with a psychic who claims to be right all the time, or even gives you percentage. I'm 95% accurate. We used to see people like Sylvia Brown and other folks on TV making those kinds of statements, especially when talking about predictions, which are impossible to come to a number. Because if you're precognitive, we're talking about somebody's future, you would have to follow up on every statement you ever made about that person or about the world to come up with a number. When somebody says they're that accurate, you have to ask them, how did you come to that conclusion or that number? Because I do that. And usually there's a lot of people who are psychics who may be really good and they just are doing it because they hear other people doing it. Or I've had a couple of psychics say, well, 95% of my clients come back to me. That's customer satisfaction. To me, that's actually good. I'd like to hear that, but I don't want to hear that that's accuracy. There are a few psychics who can do many things. There's certainly mediums who can also read living people who can see ghosts, people who can read living people and talk to dead people, but not all psychics can. There's very few psychics who can do every psychic task. And if they're claiming that, it makes me want to test them, honestly. They should know their strengths and weaknesses. It's okay to not be able to do everything. It's not everybody's a Leonardo da Vinci in their field. The best are willing to learn, whether it's from parapsychologists, from other researchers, investigators, from other psychics. They're curious about their own abilities, want to know how they work. They may have personal religious or other beliefs, but they don't force those on. They don't use that as part of their shtick. They don't force that on other people. I've known some very, very devout Catholic mediums over the years, or some other religions, and they never mention their religion in the process of doing that. They put the clients first, the client's needs first. That's important. And the best ones display a good sense of humor, especially about themselves. That's maturity when it comes down to it. But boiling it all together, good psychics have good people skills. That's a good thing. I didn't even talk about accuracy here. Of course, they want them to be accurate, but those are all personality variables. And, that's the checklist I have actually for working with someone. All right. ESAM is saying, I imagine there may be many techniques to grow ESP. Yeah, there are different ways to test it, but one of the things you have to figure out is what you're going to be good at. That's one of the reasons that's a basis for the course that I teach, is giving people different things to try. There's some people who are good at remote viewing. Other people cannot do remote viewing, but they can tell you what's in an envelope that's being held in your hand, which is not remote. It's the same ability, but we set limits on ourselves on what we can possibly do. There are psychic healers who can't do other things. There are people who might be precognitive, picking up a probable future, but not all psychics can do that, even though most clients want you to do that. So that's a piece. There's different applications of this that you have to understand there. Do you believe in NDE, from Jody, open to someone's belief in possibility of psychic ability? I said, actually, I think that an NDE can open up somebody's psychic ability whether they want to or not. I mean, that certainly has happened to people with NDEs over the years, but it certainly makes one open to that, not only possibility, but probability in that. AJ, true crime. Yeah, attention-seeking psychics drive me nuts too. Especially when I've worked with them in one way, shape, or form. It's one thing to use, because TV, other folks are coming to you. They're not necessarily attention seeking, unless they're promoting a book, in which case they are attention seeking, and for good reason, because I want to sell their book or the books. I do that. But in actual practice, they should not make it all about themselves. And the best psychics consider the people that they're doing their psychic work for. That's called empathy. That is a human trait that unfortunately we don't see too much in our society anymore. Elise, hi, good to see you here. It has been a minute. Book recommendation for learning the lingo. Uh, well, for one thing, I think that any of my early books, so Psychic Dreaming, ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, or even the ebook of Reincarnation Channeling and Poltergeist, excuse me, Reincarnation Channeling and Possession that I have, you can get them on Amazon, has a section on, I guess you could say, the lingo of the abilities, certainly. But that raises a question. I think what I'll probably do is put up, I have something, kind of a conceptual document that I have written. It's actually part of those books. I'll probably put that up on the website at some point. If you go to the website again, there's a list of online resources, and a lot of those will have some of the information about the different abilities that are out there. And there are books by good psychics. You know, there's a book called, I'm trying to remember, The Idiot's Guide to Being Psychic. I think it's actually now, the third edition was The Idiot's, I'm looking at the bookshelf, The Idiot's Guide to Developing Intuition. And it's a good book. It's still in print. My late colleague and investigating partner, Annette Martin, wrote a book called Discovering Your Psychic World, which was a workbook, which helped you figure out what's good. And I can say that there is a book by Karen Fox, which is called The Psychic Workbook, which I can recommend as well. It has a little bit more of an emphasis on New Age stuff, but it does go into different abilities. The one thing I don't think it does as well as Annette's book, which is out of print, unfortunately, is to highlight the idea that we can't all be good at everything. So it's a matter of trying. And again, your ego should not make you push too hard. Try something else. Come back to it. Try it again, but play around with that. Advice for the best way to help a family member in hospice deal with seeing past family members when nurses keep saying that nobody is there. Honestly, deathbed visions are real. I've talked to hospice workers who have experienced from their perspective exactly what you're talking about, and on occasion have themselves seen the apparently visiting deceased relatives. I think a hospice worker, you should pull the hospice workers aside and basically say, look, she's dying, or she's in this situation. Stop trying to convince her that they're not there. I mean, those kinds of experiences are calming and emotionally positive for people. So for someone to say you're deluded or you're not seeing something is incredibly, I mean, to me, that's horrifying for a hospice worker. So honestly, I would tell your mother to just simply cuss them out, and ask for a different worker, somebody else, because that's really mean to say that kind of thing. Anyway, let's see here. Are there grouping taxonomically of varying ability? Yes, there are. So there are ESP, extrasensory perception, which is not a sixth sense. Those are informational abilities like telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition. So telepathy, mind awareness of what's in another person's mind. Clairvoyance, our catch-all term for real-time ESP of information. These are all informational abilities, and precognition is information from a probable future. But there are subsets. There are different ways you can apply clairvoyance, different ways you can apply precognition to different actions. I mean, and we're talking about how, if I am clairvoyant, does that mean I get information from any target of any type? Or can I do with people, pick up information from people, but I could never do search and rescue and find somebody? I can't do psychometry. I can't hold an object and get information from the object. There's different expressions of, just like there are with art and music. Not everybody can play every single musical instrument. There's different ways to pick that up. Psychokinesis, which is mind influencing the material world includes things like self-healing, healing other people, moving objects, so telekinesis, levitation, which falls into that's what poltergeist phenomena often is unconscious PK. There is effects on computers, what we call human-machine interaction, which could be affecting your cell phone and other things in a positive or negative way, usually negative because of stress. There's metal bending, there's influencing, all sorts of other types of things. There are effects you can see and effects that are too small to see. And then we have survival of bodily death, which includes things like apparitions or ghosts, people surviving the death of the body. We do studies of mediumship, that a particular ability. There is the idea of reincarnation or consciousness surviving the death of the body and being reborn, cases like that. There's other categories as well. So, diving into, I would strongly suggest that you look at the Ryan Education Center's website. We have not listed our fall courses yet, which start in, in October, beginning of October. But if there's you should take the Introduction to Parapsychology course, which will go over all that. There's the link is right there. Thank you for the shirt comment. Some of my favorite cartoon characters from the 60s. Those of you might know the Hanna-Barbera characters. Yeah, I've got people who are new. I have a lot of crazy shirts. What can I say? You were not seeing, Jody saying, you're not seeing what she sees, but feel a sense of comfort, which talks about visitors. There are books on deathbed visions. In fact, the classic book, which was published in the early 20th century, is called Deathbed Visions. And there's plenty of material on that. And again, I just think it's inhumane for a hospice worker to tell someone who's in that circumstance that they're not seeing somebody. That's, if it was a scary figure, I'd say that. Yeah, but that's not the case here. Okay, Kathy, client of yours told you that the only thing she can feel psychically is earthquakes, thinks it's tied to a past life connection. I couldn't comment on the past life connection, but, animals can pick up earthquake, what's called P waves, pressure waves. There are changes in the Earth's magnetic field too. So, people can pick up that kind of thing as well. That could be psychic, or it could be a physiological thing too. So it could be both. It's certainly not a normal sense, but I just ordered a book which just talks about 32 senses, especially counting multiple senses of touch, like pressure and temperature. There's different sensors. We have 5 senses of taste on our tongue. We don't just have 5 senses. That's back to, I think it was Socrates or somebody else. It goes back like thousands of years at this point. All right. Thank you, Elise, for the testimonial. And Paul's talking about terminal lucidity. So for somebody who is unconscious, who has Alzheimer's, who is sedated, or some other form of dementia, there is this thing called terminal lucidity, which happens to people very often right before they die. They come out of that state, Alzheimer's patients, suddenly able to converse with the physical people in the room with full memory of everything. Somebody coming out of, there have been cases coming out of unconsciousness, even, I don't know about coma. I think there have been cases of coming out of coma. I know my friend Annette Martin, when she was dying, she had been heavily sedated because she was in a lot of pain from the cancer, but she came out of that with no pain, saw her mother and father, and I think 1 or 2 other spirits who were there to help her move on, but carried on conversations with her husband, Bruce, and her 2 students who were there as well. The 2 students were both mediums, and they saw the figures as well. So terminal lucidity is a real thing, and there's all sorts of explanations for it right now, neurological explanations, but it still doesn't quite make sense why a dying brain would simply bypass all that dementia and all that other stuff to suddenly be as lucid as they were when at their best. So that's something else connected to deathbed visions, in fact. Let's see here. Terminal. So you wonder, Esam Parsley, you wonder if the VA will fund a class. I'm trying to think, I believe we have something, we might have something for veterans. So look at the website. You might want to let me know, you can always contact me. the email that's on the channel, which is askprofparanormal@gmail.com, or just profparanormal@gmail.com. And I can check in with the folks at the Rhine and see if there's something for the VA. Might be able to give you a certainly significant discount, or I think we have worked something out with the VA in the past for that. Let's see here. And thank you, Pete, for that comment. Jody, well, yeah, I'm really happy. Anytime, Jody, just let me know. I'm happy to help point people in the right direction for that. But I just don't get it that a hospice worker would even say that. Having talked to hospice workers who have not seen the spirits, they see how calming that is, and they would never say you're not seeing anything. I mean, that has to be a true disbeliever that's doing that. It has to be in that case. All right, let me go back to another question that I got on the web. Interesting question. How do you differentiate between someone reading your mind versus speaking to a deceased individual? In other words, mediumship. I might ask Catherine Nadal to speak up on that, given that she's one of our great Forever Family Foundation mediums. But this has been the question since the early days of psychical research. Is the medium reading the person, the sitter, or is the medium communicating with spirits? And I'll say two things about that. Number one, ESP is involved. Well, three things. Number one, ESP is involved no matter what. Think of it as getting information psychically, either from a living person or living sources or the dead. It's still a form of psychic information transfer. There have been studies over the years. The initial researchers realized this early on, so that they would there'd be a random person who did not know the individual who wanted the reading. So let's say I needed to talk to my dad, who's passed away years ago. And the researchers I'm working with are going to work with a medium and ask the medium to communicate with Lloyd Auerbach's dad. But the person who's going to go in my place and take down notes doesn't know me at all, doesn't know my dad, doesn't know anything about me or him at all. So we call those proxy sitters. And the concept is that the medium, not having the person in front of them, wouldn't have any idea of who to communicate with. The other thing is that more recently, for the last number of years, Julie Beischel at the Windbridge Institute, Windbridge Research Center, has been doing some of the most controlled experiments in parapsychology with mediums. She spent a year finding mediums who could work in this particular protocol. And basically, it's like a proxy sitter, but it's even more restrictive than that. So a medium only knows that they're going to do a reading for somebody on a given day. A sitter, in other words, a person who has a relative who's died, tells the head researcher about this individual who's died. So the researcher now has some backup information and a first name and the name of the individual who's died. Okay. When it's time to schedule or to work with the medium, that head researcher gives the first name only to another researcher, who then is on the phone or Zoom with the medium and tells the medium, okay, you have to communicate with Sally today. That's all the person knows. And the medium then does the reading, connects hopefully with Sally and gives the reading. And then that's transcribed and analyzed by the researchers. Again, the researcher on the phone with the medium doesn't know anything about Sally. And then that's also given back to with other there's a little bit more complication here for analysis, but it's given back to the sitter to see whether this was right. So there's a lot of research. The other last piece of this is how much detail comes through. And I see Kathy is putting this in, the detail that comes through, too detailed, full conversation information. When you watch actual mediums talking or having conversation with spirit, it's kind of like if somebody picked up a phone, has a phone to their head, and they're having a pretend conversation with somebody. At some point when you're watching them, you can tell there's nobody on the other end. When somebody has a real conversation, you can kind of tell that too. And watching as many mediums as I have over the years, it feels, I know this is a feeling, but it feels like the medium is having an actual conversation with somebody who's not present. So there's the research end of things, and then there's the experiential piece. And the clients, very clearly, it's not just cold reading. There's a lot of specifics that come through. We work generally with what are called evidential mediums. So we want more detail, as Kathy mentions here. So there's a quite a bit here to telling things apart. And really what it boils down to, if it's just information you're looking for, it doesn't matter. If it's, I want to know that you're actually communicating with the dead, that's a different story. Evidence for survival. So there are two different things for that. And also I'll mention that it's really hard for someone who can fake psychic ability to be able to fake mediumship in a way that is what we call evidential without having done significant research on the spirit they're supposedly communicating with. So it's just not, it's a completely different context. And again, you can kind of tell. So it is different. All right. Esam, a buddy I knew, went to his mother's grave frequently. He never said, but he's always felt passively mellow, calm. So, one of the things I hear people, like some of the pseudo-skeptics, people who are disbelievers, or people just question, you can't talk to the dead. Answer, actually, you can. People do it all the time. People go to grave sites and they talk to their relatives who are in the ground, or at least their bodies are in the ground. They're not in the ground anymore. You go to the gravesite, visit the cemetery to think of that family member, to basically one-sided talk to the dead. It only becomes complicated if you hear back from the dead. So if somebody says people can't talk to the dead, that's not true. Conversation with the dead is a different story, which we have good evidence for, but you can believe what you want to believe when it comes right down to it. All right, so those are all the questions I've gotten over the web that I noticed in the Facebook posts and such. I did have somebody post something about having that they think their apartment is haunted. I've actually asked, I have one more question, actually. I can do that, but lives in a spirit possessed apartment, wonders if he should move, or he or she should move. And I will just say my advice I gave back before I get some more detailed about what's going on, because I'm not going to accept that that's what's going on right off the bat, is if you are ever living in a place that is highly uncomfortable or feels like it might be, bad for your health, mental or otherwise, if it's someplace you're renting, I would look for a new place to live. I don't care whether someone tells you it's haunted or not. It shouldn't matter. It's like, if you can afford to move, move. You shouldn't have to live in a place you don't want to live in if you can afford it as well as possible. And Esam, I assume he talked with her. People do have those conversations, certainly, as well. All right, the one question I didn't get to comes from David Korn, one of my colleagues in Scotland. He normally has some really interesting questions about parapsychology, but this is a different kind of question. And he says, I'll go slightly off track and ask you if you agree with me following undeniable fact. Star Trek Strange New Worlds is the best Star Trek series ever, not just because of the Lower Decks crossover episode, but that has a fair amount to do with it. All right, I am a Star Trek fan from way, way back. I'm old enough to have watched the original series on NBC when it was first broadcast. Each episode was first broadcast. I don't think I missed a single one in first play. I watched them in reruns as well. I attended some of the very first Star Trek conventions when they were in New York, 1974 and 75. I think the first one was 73, but I attended 74 and 75. I have met and had dinner with William Shatner over the years. I'm a major Star Trek fan, and I've loved every iteration for varying degrees. So, to respond to David's question, I am partial to Deep Space Nine for a lot of reasons, but I will say I agree. Personally, I think Strange New Worlds, even though it's been genre defying by doing singing and other weird things, I think it's been the best expression of what Star Trek represents to date. And that's partly because I think the people who are handling it know what they're doing. They're having fun very clearly. They have good writers, and the special effects are amazing. Everything's great. Um, it does not have the same feeling every episode, which I think is a very good thing. And I do agree that Lower Decks episode was phenomenal. So I'm a big fan of Lower Decks as well. Still like Deep Space Nine. I have all the DVDs, the whole series on DVD here, and I still watch it from time to time. Okay, and in fact, as I showed last time, I even have an actual original series tricorder that has an EMF sensor, temperature sensor, atmospheric sensors otherwise, and other things. So that's how much of a geek I am about Star Trek. All right, my favorite Hanna-Barbera characters. Well, honestly, I'm going to go with Space Ghost. Not just because it's Space Ghost and he's a ghost, because he's not really a ghost, but that's my favorite Hanna-Barbera character. I actually watched Space Ghost Coast to Coast. I had hopes of actually getting on Space Ghost Coast to Coast, and I have a Space Ghost Coast to Coast figure up on a shelf. A friend of mine who worked for ILM for one of my birthdays years ago took an action figure of another type and doctored it so it looks like me. So I have Space Ghost at his desk interviewing the Lloyd Auerbach action figure. So that's my favorite. But most of these other ones, I like Birdman. Frankenstein Jr. was okay. Herculoids I loved as well. Yeah, I'd love to see something, redo. And Space Ghost in the comic books, there's been a really great series that's been going on for a long time. Okay, let's see. Let's see what else. We've got just a few more minutes here. This thing gives you an alert 30 minutes early, but not when it starts. Okay, well, welcome, Liz. All right. When talking to spirit, ask for very specific signs. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. You can ask for specific signs. It shouldn't be something common in the environment. It should be like unusual in the environment that you happen to be in. So people ask for different signs, and they get them as well. Let's see. 70s did original reruns every Sunday evening. Star Trek, always incredible. Yeah, I was in college in the 70s, and we had a TV down in the dorm in the main lobby, because I was in a dorm at Northwestern in a converted apartment building, and we had a big lobby, and there was TV down there. And when Star Trek was on, it was on. Doctor Who was also on at the time. This is when Doctor Who first came into the States. So that's how old I am. All right, Randy Liebeck, Star Trek Picard Season 3 was an outstanding treat for us, Next Generation. I would agree with that. I think that, we could talk Star Trek there's been so much Star Trek. And I think Season 3 was great because they brought in the Next Generation reunion that was there. Very different than the previous two seasons. I know some people aren't big on that, but it's really good. Yeah, definitely very good. And I know there's a lot of talk about what's coming. I don't know if you've all seen the trailer for Starfleet Academy, but that looks amazing, and it's got some great actors. Paul Giamatti's playing the villain. Holly Hunter is kind of the chancellor of the academy. It looks great. And there's also talk of a couple of other series, including a Star Trek Year One, which would be the year that Kirk took over the Enterprise before the series started. I don't know if that's ever going to go forward, but there's potentially enough. Depends on the new owners of Paramount, whether they're going to want to do that. And since apparently there's also discussion of finally getting to another Star Trek film, the new owner Skydance might actually definitely support that. We'll see what happens. One of the things about Star Trek I want to say, and Star Wars both, is that they have great examples of psychic abilities. I mean, Star Wars, obviously, the Jedi and the Sith, there is quite a bit there. But in Star Trek, they really did a great job of using science fiction to display different psychic abilities. In fact, the actual, it was the second pilot. It was the first pilot with Captain Kirk, where no man has gone before. They mention people's ESPER ratings, ESPER. And an ESPER was a term in science fiction since the 50s that was used to describe somebody who is psychic. I kind of prefer that to psychic in some respects if you're using ESP. But Star Trek did a lot of great examples, and great examples of consciousness without a body. Of course, they were typically aliens, but really dove into some of these issues, and so did Next Generation and pretty much every series afterwards. So one of the things that I tell my students about, and certainly the students that I'm teaching 2 classes right now for the Rhine. One is this developing intuition, which is developing ESP, and the other is presenting the paranormal to the public. And I one of the things I always say is I came into looking at these abilities and looking at ghosts and things like that from a dramatic or comedy perspective for ghostly stuff. Some of the early days, TV show called Topper. There was The Ghost of Mrs. Muir. There were films old movies and new movies in the 60s that had ghosts that were always looking like humans, not horror. There were some scary ones like The Haunting in the early 60s, but that was more residual and kind of different as well. But also came into this from science fiction and comic books. And science fiction treats psychic abilities and psychic phenomena, the paranormal, very differently than horror films do and horror literature. So I recommend, that's the angle you want to come into, because number one, it makes you think. And number two, it presents it, even though they're exaggerated, often with some good backup and sometimes good research that's there. All right. Yeah. Actually, all the Star Trek, I think Star Trek, Next Gen, and Deep Space Nine are all on MeTV on Saturdays. And I think they're also on a couple, I think one at Cozy TV or one of the other ones are regular reruns as well. The other shows are all, of course, on Paramount Plus at this point. And just, if you're not watching Stranger Worlds, hopefully you'll get the chance. If you don't have Paramount Plus, hopefully you get a chance at some point to see it, because it's a great show. It's just a lot of fun in general. There are some different genres they've touched on, but this one's a lot of fun. Okay, thank you, Esam. Okay, one last question: did we land on the moon? You damn straight we landed on the moon. The whole conspiracy theory of the moon landing comes from one guy, who apparently Buzz Aldrin decked, hit him at one point. There is the idea we didn't land on the moon, the conspiracy that involved. There's several things that are important to understand. Number one, we were technologically advanced to land on the moon. Now, it was not the best technology, but rocket science is not that hard if can make calculations as to the navigation. That's the tough part. Number two, Russia was the Soviet Union was in a race with us, the space race. And had we not landed on the moon, do you really think that the Soviets would have let that lie? It's not like we gave them anything. They stopped their, or they changed the program quite a bit. Other types of things, like eventually China didn't have a foot in the game, but they were monitoring. France, England, every country on the planet with any sort of technology was monitoring. That's number one. Number two, with the right telescope, you can see the landing spot. Are other countries now that have gone to the moon with their robotic devices have taken pictures of the Sea of Tranquility and the Apollo 11 landing spot. And there was more than one mission. When people say, well, did the Apollo 11 land on the moon? The answer is, yes, they did. Well, did we land on the moon? It's like, well, which one? So there's quite a bit. Plus, the conspiracy would have needed over 100,000 people in some way, shape, or form connected to the original program to keep their mouths shut. So, yeah, landed on the moon. All right. Others claim, some claim, there was an ET with, there's that claim. I've been fortunate. I've known people who knew people. My friend, I'm going to continue just for a minute or two since we started a little bit late. But my late friend Martin Caden, who I got to know very well in the 1990s, science and science fiction writer, had been connected to NASA as a journalist and then as a consultant down the road since the original space shots. My dad knew a lot of folks at NASA. He was with the NBC News crew, not the on the air, but in the crew for the Mercury and Gemini space shots. Roy Neal, who worked with my dad in later years, was the science editor and involved in looking at what was going on there. There were a lot of journalists that were involved with the Apollo 11 mission and all the Apollo missions. I can tell you that they would have broken the story if this was not true. I've had sat down for dinner with Gordon Cooper and Roy Neal, and Marty Caden knew pretty much everybody who walked on the moon, and there were the samples from the moon. So to say that we didn't land is disrespectful to the memory of folks like Jim Lovell, who just passed away, and all the others who walked that walk. I actually saw something on one of the fake news, the comedy news shows, Jim Jeffries, where he was interviewing 4 people from QAnon, younger people, and they were all talking about the flat Earth and all this other stuff, and they're all agreeing with each other. And then at one point, one of the guys says, "Yeah, we didn't land on the moon. That was all CGI." And the other 3 turned and looked at him like he was nuts, because we did not have CGI Pong had not even been invented at that point for computer graphics. So the idea that we had computer graphics that could have done that, not possible. But again, all those other countries, the signal was coming from the moon. So plus all the other evidence. Anyway, that we're kind of ending on a completely non-parapsychology piece. Whether they had experiences with ETs or saw something, there certainly were some things that were seen, but not, I don't know. It's very controversial about what happened on the moon. I do know Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14, did some ESP experiments from Apollo 14. And he came back changed, like a lot of folks are, looking at the Earth so small, and co-founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is a great organization that does parapsychology research, psychic research, and research on other areas. So ions.org is a great place to check out. It's one of the organizations listed on my resources page, my online resources page on my website. So I'm going to point you to my website again. It's just lloydauerbach.com. Remember, Lloyd has 1 L there. And you'll find a useful FAQ on the paranormal and general apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists. And there's resources that are there, online resources, credible organizations, and media, and lots of other stuff that you'll find. All right, so I'm going to close down now and say goodnight. I will be back in 2 weeks. I mentioned at the top of the show that we are skipping an extra week in September. So August 24th. Then the next one will be September 7th. I'm sorry, I take that back. The next one will be September 14th. So August 24th, September 14th, September 21st, and then 2 weeks after through the end of the year. All right, we won't look at the beginning of January until we're done with December. So again, August 24th, September 14th, September 21, those are the next 3 shows. Send along your questions, either respond to a post I put on Facebook or Twitter, or one of the other social media. I'm also on Threads and also Blue Sky, or send them to askprofparanormal@gmail.com. Again, you can find my email address in the channel description. Thanks, everybody. And yes, live long and prosper. Good night.